Okay, so my first question is a sort of I'm looking at sort of doing this piece, doing a sort of background to the history, and then sort of talking about the present after. So I just kind of want to go in with a sort of stock. It's quite a big question, but would you say it's a historical fact that international development in Africa can be traced back to European colonialism?
Absolutely. It's, in my opinion, it's a continuity of European colonialism. People talk about post-colonialism. There are very few places in the world which have experienced that. It is a continuity of colonialism, all dressed up in a modernist lingo that has uses the term development because it implies progress and continuity. It's far from that. It's a continuity of the extractive process of colonialism.
And in the 2002 piece, you explain how missionary and voluntary organisations cooperated and were part of the European colonisation of Africa. Can you describe a bit more about that?
Well, I mean, basically, their role became primary in the period of the rise of neoliberalism, where the state was considered inefficient and money was thrown at the private sector. It was privatization of everything. But so long as it was profitable, it went to the profit-making private sector. But where it was not profitable, like providing water or health services to the natives, it went to the other private sector, the third sector, so-called, the NGO sector. And they fulfilled that function. It was a continuity of what the missionaries, the role of the missionaries, was to formal colonialism. They then played for the same service for neocolonialism. And so their rationale was based on a fundamentally racist conception. And that is that they saw themselves as saviors. This is the white saviors. But saviors need victims. You cannot be a savior if you don't have victims. So they became the new victimizers of the native. And that was the core definition of the white savior complex, which was fundamental to the rise of these international development NGOs.
And you describe in the piece how the sort of divergent histories of the overseas missionary societies like the CCK and then the war charities like Oxfam. So for someone that doesn't know a lot about this history, could you maybe, like you sort of do in the article, explain how these were sort of separate and then maybe come back together, or yeah?
Well, the churches faced a dilemma in the 50s because with the rising move towards independence, they organized basically on exactly the racial division of labor. That is, those who ruled, who managed, were white missionaries. Those who did the work were the black ones. But they understood that this was not going to be sustainable. And so they were the first to then do what the state did later, and that was to blacken the leadership without any substantial change to the function, purpose, or ideology. For the Oxfam's Save the Children Fund and all these other British charities, they were born to serve the European destruction. But with the Marshall Plan, their role was over. Until much later, of course, but their role in Europe was over. And so they face this dilemma. Do they carry on, or do they transform themselves? And so they heard the new ideology emanating from Washington, which said, because socialism was so popular in Africa, to counter that, they invented this word development because of its progressive nature. And of course, the white saviors loved it because they now could land there in their parachutes with bags full of all the tricks of the trade. It was no longer a period of the struggle for emancipation, the struggle for freedom. They actually depoliticized that by substituting development for freedom. And they were very successful in doing that. But they served very fundamentally the interests of the emerging ruling class in Africa, because they too could now say, now, okay, folks, quieten down now. It's no longer about freedom, now it's development. And so they played into that. And of course, once we had the rise of neoliberal ideologies, then it was party time, yeah, because millions of aid money went through these NGOs. And it took them until really the late 1990s, I would say even the new millennium. It took them that long to then say, actually, hang on, we need some black leadership here. Okay, and it was only then. And if you look at Oxfam, right across the continent, there were always white directors. Okay, and that was the way they operated. But then, when the aid agencies said, well, why, we need to provide direct funding to NGOs. So Oxfam moved its head office to Nairobi. Action Aid did that to South Africa. It's the same game. So now we're not only black, but we are African. Okay, so now with a black face, they could deliver for empire, just as our presidents do from the state.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think your work is kind of so clear about the this theme of continuity from the past, and do you think that even like today, like right now, because from the sort of UK standpoint, we've got the merger of the International Development Department and the Foreign Office, which is quite controversial here. So and obviously recently we've had a sort of re-enlightenment of the Black Lives Matter movement and everything. And do you still think that this continuity is still true right now of international development organisations?
Absolutely. I mean, I love it that DFID is now inside the forum, because aid has always been, and has always, there has never been an exception, always been an instrument of foreign policy. And foreign policy has always been an instrument for the facilitation of the exploitation of Africa by the transnational corporations. In your country, in my country, everywhere today, our governments are more accountable to the transnationals and the finance houses than they are to the citizens who elected them. That's where we are today. What Black Lives Matter is at least beginning to challenge the fundamentally racist nature of development and of these international NGOs. They're all bleating and complaining in the UK. Why? What is needed is not aid. What is needed is solidarity. And solidarity is what love looks like on the streets. And if you can't love, then you can only have a technical relationship, which is not neutral, because technology is defined by the social relations, but the power relations there. And they will all deny that they have power and have exercised that power, and even deny in whose interest really it serves. If they've got some black people there suffering with swollen bellies, they can have pictures. They can indulge in development pornography, because that's what it is. And I think we're seeing that coming back as everyone moves to the right with Johnson. So we're seeing it coming back.
And I mean, you just talked about sort of solidarity as a sort of better model. I mean, what do you see as, because whenever you talk about this topic, people are always just going to say, okay, but then what is the alternative? So could you maybe just talk a bit more about that, and what you see as, whether development, can that ever be a positive thing? What do you think?
Well, first of all, the alternative I'm posing is solidarity. And solidarity is what love looks like on the streets. Okay. If you have a relationship of love with somebody, it is a mutually beneficial. It helps each other grow. It recognizes each other's oppressions and seeks to free themselves both as equals. It's perhaps modern day love isn't one of equals, but it should be. It should be one of equals. And because then it is fundamentally an issue where there is no power over. Okay, it's power amongst. Now, surely it's not beyond the bounds of human imagination to say that we can have that relationship, that I come from a society which has dehumanized Africans, and because I have been a beneficiary of that, I have become dehumanized. Now we must work together to free ourselves and discover who we are as humans, to invent what it means to be human again. That is what it's about. It's not a financial transaction. It has to be that. It has to be. And so that's why I think we have to be bold. I know the British don't like to talk about these things, but it is about love. It's the fundamental definition of love. And if it can't be, then they can fuck off. I mean, because it'll always be then, just as men oppress women, so it'll be a continuity of that imperial relationship.
And how do you see that? I mean, if that's going to happen, I mean, sort of like who's responsibility is that? Is it sort of like African leaders? Is it these organizations? Is it the charities? Or is it just, you know, people trying to educate themselves about these issues on an individual level? Sorry, I'm just going to shut the window because someone started mowing their lawn. Typical. Yeah.
Say that again, sorry.
It's okay. So what do you see, if we're going to try and push this as you know, the sort of what needs to happen to make the whole industry or whatever to just to make this a relationship better? Is it something that like African leaders should be pushing? Is it something international governments or organizations should be pushing? Or is that the wrong approach? Should it just be people on an individual level trying to learn and educate themselves? Is it social protests? What do you think is a sort of tangible way to achieve this solidarity?
Well, it's none of those. And it's really important, because one of the fundamental justifications for the development industry has been this premise that people do not think. They cannot think. They cannot think collectively.
Mm.
Okay, so if you condemn people to think they can't think, i.e. they're less than human, then you can do whatever you like to them. This is a fundamentally political problem. It's a question of organizing politically. If the Oxfam, Boxfam, Soxfams of the world want to be committed to this, their place is not in Kenya or Nigeria or South Africa and all these other places where they get extra money for hardship. It's about politically organizing at home against the transnational corporations that operate there, organize against their government, to enable the British people to help them organize to think and understand the way in which it is not they who are to be blamed, it is their silence that has to be blamed. So give them help, they belong there. On that basis, a relationship can be developed. It can't be done overnight. There's no overnight solutions. But it is a political problem. And it's based on believing that people don't think. If you realize that people can think, I mean, we're talking about going back to Freire's writings. You know, that people, there is a pedagogy of the oppressed. There is, that people do think, do organize, give them a chance, and they can transform things. It is not the intellectuals, it's not the development wallahs who are going to be the actors in this. It has to be about power and what you deal, how you convert power, how do you seize power, in a sense, on a collective basis rather than leaving it to some elitist project.
And would you say that I mean, we've talked about, you know, how they've changed the ideology and the language more from, you know, sort of uncivilized to underdeveloped and this kind of language. I mean, do you think that there's been sort of any significant change at all in development, or you really think fundamentally the principles are the same as they were during, you know, colonial empires?
I think there's been a certain development. That there are groups which have understood their role as solidarity, as political, intervening politically, and I think that's a particular form of NGOs which is a minority but an important one.
Can you name some examples?
Well, I mean, for example, I see a lot of the work of War on Want, for example, organizing in ways which is clearly political, which is clearly taking on issues. You may disagree with this and that, whatever, but they are seeing their territory is at home, not at my home.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And there is a basis for solidarity. And so, there's a transition, I think, happening in that way. But and I think particularly with the loss of funds from aid and now being so closely associated with imperialism, it it poses some problems. Either you become an organ of that or you don't. And I think that is a dilemma that is beginning to happen. But there is a huge amount now that potential for thinking. But all I read in the press and in the discussion dialogues on the NGOs is the problems of begging from the Foreign Office. How do we resolve this? DFID has to be independent. It's never been independent. I mean, it's bizarre.
Yeah. So do you think fundamentally that if development and aid organizations are going to be helpful, they need to work in their home countries to try and politicize the issues and humanize the sort of recipients or whatever that they're talking about? You think that is that?
I think they should close.
Okay.
because their form, their structure. I mean, form follows function.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't change your function without changing your form.
Do you think they're kind of beyond reform in that sense, just from their
beyond redemption?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I think if they're serious, then they have to. And to become genuinely political, they have to go through a transition where they know that British working people are able to think, are able to create, are able to organize, and that their role is to support that, not to undermine it. I mean, take the before your time, but the miners' strike. Where were the NGOs? Where were the nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be seen. Yeah, in the time of Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, where were the NGOs? Nowhere to be seen. As soon as he was killed and Compaore established his dictatorial regime, they all came in hordes. Yeah. Where were they when the Cuban Revolution? Where were they in the Vietnam War? Nowhere to be seen. Because that's not their function. Their function is to be part of the British Empire.
I mean, it's so tricky because I mean, I was a while ago on the one of the British volunteering things. It was the ICS scheme in Togo, and I've contacted some of the people who work for the YMCA in Togo about this story and what I'm writing, and some of them have contacted me to say, why are you linking the ICS scheme to colonialism? Like, we don't get it. Like, we thought it was a really good scheme, and I sort of struggle to know how to respond, because it's like, I'm not from Togo. I'm interested in this topic, but you know more about Togolese development than me, so I don't want to tell you that I think that it is linked to colonialism if you don't think it is. So, and then in that situation, I mean, I don't know what to say, really.
Well, I think your job is to ask the questions,
Yeah,
not to provide the answers.
yeah.
Because it's questions that help us think.
Yeah.
Without questions, you're just a slave.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid of asking questions. Uh, you may not agree with the answer, but
Yeah.
for, yeah.
Okay, I just checked. Got any other
So here you
questions?
are, you're asking me questions, and I'm giving you a whole lot of bullshit, and you may not
Right.
agree with any of it, but you've actually provoked some thinking.
Well, I mean, it's great because yeah, I've just finished uni, and it's really interesting to actually have to speak to people that I've studied and stuff. So in the journalistic form. um, I mean, yeah. So picture, I guess, because after this interview, I'm going to speak to some Oxfam people, and would you say, if someone that I know people who have wanted to be devoted humanitarians today, working for either DFID or Oxfam. I mean, and what would you say to them if they're saying, this history with colonialism, that's a bit debatable. I'm not sure about that, but I want to make, I want to do good work today. Like criticizing this isn't going to make poverty go away. What would you say to those people?
I'd say the problem is not poverty. The problem is impoverishment, the processes that make people poor. What are you doing about that? Because if you're not fighting those who make us poor,
Mm,
you're wasting your time.
yeah,
And wasting worse, you're wasting our time so that Togolese think you're doing good.
yeah. So I guess could you say that they're currently the way they're sort of structured is to almost deliberately focus on the symptoms of poverty rather than the actual cause and processes of it.
Absolutely, because they are saviors. They need victims.
Mm,
If there are no victims, they go out of business.
yeah,
And for more than 50, 60 years, Oxfam is saying, we're working a way to get ourselves out of business. They are now bigger than they ever were.
yeah,
What's this? Uh, it's and they'll fund a few progressive little projects, etc., to yeah, to give a face to it. But but they won't. They cannot. They cannot admit that for 60 years they've been causing harm. They cannot admit to that. To do so is to go into crisis.
yeah,
60 years of my work and it's all wasted? Of course they're going to deny it.
yeah,
But it is how they deny it. So questions that you will ask how they deny it, that is the most interesting.
yeah,
Let them defend themselves. Let them say it, because the more they speak, the more we get to understand how
yeah.
they think. Yeah. Um, and it's helpful for knowing your enemy.
Yeah, yeah. That's all my questions. So if you have anything else that you want to say, feel free to go
What,
ahead. Um,
just like to know what you're going to do with all this.
so the piece isn't going to be that long. It's going to be about 1,500 words max, really, and it's just sort of it's a sort of new magazine focusing on history and present. So I'm sort of planning on doing like a rough introduction with a sort of I know someone who I did volunteered with who's going to do like a narrative description of their experience kind of volunteering and how they felt a bit sort of iffy about it, and then go into the history, because the editor said to me that I think the editor basically is not 100% sure about the link between colonialism and development. So he was like, if you can make the case, that's fine, which I'm very confident that I can do. So then I'm going to do that, the sort of the history bit as I mean, I know history is always debatable, but I'm going to try and make that not a debatable bit, and then I'm going to try and make the debate uh, with people people from different points being like, this is the history, what then people do with this history today. And some people, as you know, are kind of like, well, like Oxfam, like, well, you know, colonialism was a terrible shame, but we still think we're doing good. And then, you know, there's then other people like you who are much more critical. So, and then I'm not making a judgment at the end of the piece. It's for the readers to decide what they think, really. So yeah, and then I've obviously spoken to some people from that I know from Togo as well who managed the scheme and people who benefited from it. As I said, they've been pretty positive about it, which I was quite surprised by, but their opinion. So yeah.
But of course, I mean, you know, if you've got nothing, to get something is certainly something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. I mean, I don't think you'll get an agreement from them. It would lead to a crisis in their thinking, of course. But thank you for getting in touch. And,
No, thank you for speaking. It's
luck.
been really good.
Yeah, I look forward to reading your piece.
Yeah, I'll send it to you as soon as it comes out. It might be next week or the week after, but I'll send you the link. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. Have a great
All right.
weekend.
Right. And you. Thanks, Natasha.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.